It was a routine afternoon flight from Chicago to Los Angeles, the kind where the cabin hums with quiet conversation, soft music, and the occasional clink of coffee cups. Business travelers filled most of the seats, people with laptops open, phones charging, minds half in the air and half already in meetings waiting for them on the ground. In seat 4A, a man named David Carter sat calmly, reading from a small leather notebook. He was dressed in a simple charcoal grey suit, no tie, his posture straight but unassuming. He didn't wear anything flashy, no gold watch, no designer sunglasses, but there was a quiet confidence about him. The kind that comes from a life spent earning, not showing. The flight attendants moved through the aisles efficiently, their voices low and professional. Most of the passengers were polite, though a few, the kind who traveled often enough to forget their manners, snapped when their drinks were late or asked for upgrades that didn't exist. David wasn't one of them. He'd been flying for nearly 20 years, but he still treated every flight like a shared space, not a personal kingdom. He smiled at the attendants, said please and thank you, and even offered to switch seats with a mother traveling with her child. But halfway through the flight, as the beverage service reached his row, the atmosphere shifted. A tall flight attendant with neatly pinned hair and an expression that bordered on impatience stopped at his seat. Her name tag read S. Turner. "Drink?" she asked briskly. "Yes, ma'am," David said politely. "Just a water, please." She handed him a cup without looking at him. The water splashed slightly over the rim, wetting his hand and the edge of his notebook. He looked up, startled but calm. "Oh, I think it spilled a little. Could I have a napkin, please?" She exhaled sharply, as though he'd just asked for something unreasonable. "There's a stack right by the lavatory. You can grab one yourself." A few passengers nearby glanced up. David blinked, surprised, but kept his voice even. "I'm sorry, I just thought you might have one on the cart." Her lips tightened. "Sir, I'm serving an entire cabin. I don't have time to babysit over a drop of water." Her tone was clipped, sharp. A few heads turned. David felt the eyes but said nothing, simply nodding and setting the damp notebook aside. He reached for his briefcase under the seat, retrieving a tissue to dry his hand. As he leaned down, the cart behind her jerked suddenly. Someone had bumped it from the other side. The motion sent her elbow swinging slightly backward, brushing against his shoulder. Startled, he looked up, his hand raised instinctively in defense. She turned around fast. "Don't touch me," she snapped, her voice rising. He froze. "I didn't." Before he could finish, she struck him across the face with the back of her hand. The sound cracked through the cabin like static. The entire row fell silent. The businessman across the aisle dropped his coffee. A woman gasped audibly. David sat still, shock flashing across his features for only a moment, before his face went neutral again, calm, restrained, but clearly pained. "What is wrong with you?" A passenger in row 5 blurted out. The flight attendant's breathing quickened. "He grabbed me," she shouted. He reached out while I was serving." "That's not what happened," the man beside David said firmly. "I saw it." "He didn't touch you." A murmur spread through the cabin. Another woman farther back chimed in. "She hit him. Everyone saw it." Turner's eyes darted around, her face pale but defiant. "Everyone calm down," she snapped. "Sir, stay seated. We'll handle this when we land." David didn't move. His cheek was reddening, but his expression remained collected, his voice measured. "You'll handle it before that," he said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" He unbuckled his seatbelt slowly, then reached into his briefcase, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the deliberate ease of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The passengers around him held their breath. He pulled out a thin black folder, embossed with silver lettering Carter Aviation Group. Inside, a business card glinted in the cabin light. He placed it on the tray table in front of him and looked directly at her. "My name is David Carter," he said calmly. "I'm the CEO of Carter Aviation Group, the company that holds your airline's aircraft leasing contract." The silence that followed was absolute. Turner's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her face went completely white. David continued, his tone still level. "I think we should speak to the pilot immediately." The man in the next seat looked between them in disbelief. "Wait, you own the planes?" David nodded slightly. "We manage and lease a large portion of their fleet, yes." Turner stepped back, trembling. I didn't know who you were. That's clear." David said, his voice still calm but sharper now. "And that's exactly the problem. Respect shouldn't depend on who someone is. It should depend on how you behave." He stood up, not aggressive, but with the kind of quiet authority that silenced even the murmurs around him. He turned to the nearest attendant, a younger woman who had been frozen in shock. "Would you please ask the captain to meet me when it's safe to do so?" The young attendant nodded quickly, disappearing toward the cockpit. Turner stepped back, visibly shaking now. "Sir, I overreacted. I'm sorry." "I thought—" David interrupted gently. "You thought I was less than you. You saw me as a problem before you saw me as a person. That's not an overreaction. That's a reflection." No one in the cabin moved. The hum of the engines seemed louder now, filling the space between every heartbeat. Within minutes, the pilot appeared from the cockpit, his expression tight. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully, glancing at the name on the card. "I'm very sorry for this incident." David gave a polite nod. "Let's keep the plane calm. We'll handle this properly after landing. No disruption for the passengers." The pilot nodded quickly. "Of course." As the pilot escorted the shaken flight attendant toward the galley, whispers spread through the cabin like wildfire. People were already taking out phones, some texting, some recording the aftermath. David sat back down, exhaling slowly, rubbing his temple where her hand had landed. The man beside him leaned in. "Sir, if that had been me, I'd have lost it." David smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed tired. "Then we'd both be wrong. I've learned you can't teach grace by abandoning it." The rest of the flight passed in uneasy quiet. When they landed at LAX, a team of airline executives and security officers met the plane at the gate. Turner was quietly escorted off, head down, tears streaking her face. David stood near the door, shaking hands with the captain. One of the airline directors, a man in a suit too expensive to belong in an airport, approached him nervously. "Mr. Carter, please accept our deepest apologies. This is unacceptable. We'll launch an immediate review." David handed him the same business card he'd shown earlier. "You won't need to launch anything. You'll receive notice from our board in the morning. Our company will be reviewing your contract." The executive's face drained of color. You can't mean—" David's voice stayed steady. "I mean exactly that. We invest in airlines that uphold respect at every level. Yours just failed that test at 35,000 feet. He walked off the plane without raising his voice, without looking back. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Headlines, videos, witness accounts. The airline scrambled to control the narrative, releasing statements about training improvements and isolated incidents, but none of it mattered. The footage spoke louder. Within 10 days, Carter Aviation Group announced it was ending its leasing partnership with the carrier, a move that sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. Their stock plummeted by 27% overnight, and as for David Carter, he never mentioned the incident again. He didn't need to, because sometimes the loudest statement isn't made through anger or outrage. It's made through quiet action, the kind that reminds everyone watching that true power doesn't shout, it simply stands calm and certain, and lets the world catch up. The next morning, the world seemed to wake up talking about the incident. A video from the flight had made its way online, filmed discreetly by one of the passengers in row 6. It was only 40 seconds long, but it was enough. The sound of the slap, the stunned silence, the sight of David Carter standing calmly as the woman who'd struck him stammered in shock. By breakfast, millions had seen it. The caption beneath most of the posts was simple: "She hit the wrong man." In his quiet home office overlooking Lake Michigan, David sat at his desk, phone buzzing with calls he hadn't yet answered. His assistant had already left 4 voicemails, and reporters were emailing faster than his inbox could load. But he ignored them all for the moment. Instead, he poured himself a cup of black coffee and stared at the rising sun reflecting off the water. He wasn't angry. Not anymore. He was thoughtful, reflective in the way people become when the truth about something bigger than themselves begins to surface. He knew what would happen next. Statements, denials, apologies that weren't really apologies. It was the same cycle every time someone's hidden prejudice found a camera. But this time he had a say in what the ending looked like. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Ava Chen, the chief operating officer of Carter Aviation Group. His most trusted executive and longtime friend. He picked up. "Morning, Ava." "Morning," she said dryly. "You mean firestorm. Have you seen the news?" "I've seen enough," David said calmly. "Every outlet is running it. It's on CNN, BBC, even business channels. They're calling it the flight incident." The airline issued a 2-sentence apology saying it's under review. David exhaled quietly. "Expected. I know you said to wait," Ava said, "but this is spreading too fast. We should make a statement." He nodded to himself. "We will, but not about the slap." There was a pause. "Then what about?" "About standards," he said simply. "We don't need to fuel outrage. We need to raise the bar." Ava knew that tone. It was the one he used right before making a decision that would ripple through an entire industry. "You're thinking about pulling the contracts, aren't you?" "I'm thinking," David said, "about what kind of companies deserve our planes." By noon, he was in the boardroom of Carter Aviation's downtown office, a minimalist space of glass and steel overlooking the city. His team of executives sat around the table, phones open, eyes darting between him and the news screens on the wall. "This incident has gone global," Ava said, pulling up data on her tablet. "Over 20 million views in 12 hours. The airline's statement is being criticized as dismissive. Shareholders are nervous." David folded his hands. "We're not here to capitalize on a scandal. We're here to examine culture. That airline isn't the only one that treats people differently depending on their seat number or their skin." A murmur of agreement moved around the table. He continued, voice steady. "We have leverage. We don't just lease aircraft. We shape the image of modern flight. That means we decide who we trust to represent what aviation should stand for. Safety, yes. Efficiency, yes. But also respect." Ava leaned forward. "So what's the plan?" David tapped the table lightly, each word deliberate. "We suspend their contracts. All 52 aircraft under our leasing division. Effective immediately." The room fell silent. "Sir," one of the financial officers said carefully, "that's nearly half their long-haul fleet." They'll manage," David said. "Or they won't. Either way, the message will be clear." Ava smiled slightly. "You do realize this decision will make headlines?" He looked out the window. "Then let them print the right ones." Within an hour, Carter Aviation Group's official statement went live across its channels. It was brief, just 4 sentences. "We believe respect is not optional in any industry. Yesterday's incident was not an isolated mistake, but a reflection of a culture that we can no longer endorse. Effective immediately, Carter Aviation Group is suspending all leasing contracts with Delta Sky Air pending review. We stand for dignity in the skies and beyond." The response was immediate. The press called it a corporate earthquake. The airline's stock plunged 18% in 2 hours. Employees of the company flooded social media with internal emails and messages of frustration. Some praised David's integrity. Others called it too harsh. But for once, the conversation wasn't about damage control. It was about accountability. Meanwhile, David stayed mostly silent. He didn't appear on television or release interviews. He spent the next 2 days meeting with advocacy groups, aviation unions, and pilot associations, discussing how to improve equality and de-escalation training within the industry. On the 3rd morning, he received a message from an unexpected sender, Sarah Turner, the flight attendant who had struck him. Her email was short. "Mr. Carter, I don't expect you to forgive me. I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that I've been let go from the airline. I deserve that. What I don't deserve is the thousands of hateful messages I'm getting online. I made a mistake, and a serious one, but I want to learn from it. I just wanted you to hear that from me." Sarah Turner. David read it twice before closing his laptop. For a long moment, he sat quietly, staring at the framed photograph on his desk. A picture of his mother, smiling in her Sunday dress, holding his college diploma with pride. She had raised him to stand firm but never cruel, to correct but never crush. He picked up his phone and called Ava. "I'm issuing one more statement," he said. "About her?" Ava asked. "Yes." An hour later, a follow-up message appeared on Carter Aviation's official feed. Carter Aviation Group stands against all forms of disrespect, including the kind that hides behind outrage. Accountability means growth, not destruction. We believe in consequences, but also in second chances. Let this moment change us, not divide us. The tone of the conversation shifted again. News outlets began calling his response an example of leadership in restraint. Even those who had demanded harsher punishment started to see the wisdom in it. That evening, David took a late flight to New York for a meeting. The flight attendants greeted him warmly, their professionalism careful but genuine. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, lingered a moment longer. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "we all saw what happened. Thank you for handling it the way you did. You reminded a lot of us why we started this job, to serve with respect, not fear." David smiled faintly. "That means more than you think." When he settled into his seat and the plane began its ascent, he looked out over the lights below, spreading like constellations across the ground. He wasn't proud of being the man in the video, but he was proud of what came after. The silence he'd kept, the choices he'd made, the way he'd turned a moment of humiliation into something that lifted more than it broke. Because leadership, he knew, wasn't about revenge or authority. It was about what you built when the world gave you the power to destroy. By the end of the week, the world had turned David Carter into a symbol. News anchors called him the CEO who changed corporate ethics mid-flight, while columnists debated whether his decision to suspend Delta Sky's contracts was an act of principle or power. But David himself kept his distance from the noise. He didn't care about the labels or the trending hashtags. What mattered to him were the results. And the results were visible everywhere. For the first time in years, airlines across the industry were reviewing their employee training manuals, updating conduct policies, and adding new diversity and de-escalation courses. Aviation forums were flooded with discussions about how power, respect, and perception could make or break a company's reputation. In his Chicago office, David sat with his sleeves rolled up, surrounded by reports. His assistant Nora entered carrying 2 coffees. "You've been in here all morning," she said gently. "You should eat something." He smiled faintly, taking the cup. "Food can wait. Culture can't," Nora chuckled. "You sound like a headline again." David leaned back, glancing at the wall where a framed photo of a jet engine blueprint hung, his first design sketch from 25 years ago. "When I started in this business," he said, "I thought innovation was about machinery. Turns out it's about humanity." She nodded quietly. "You really think this will change things?" "It already has," he said. "Now the question is whether it lasts." Later that afternoon, he had a meeting with Delta Sky's executive board. Their headquarters sat in a glass tower downtown, overlooking the river. They'd requested the meeting themselves, desperate, apologetic, and fearful of what losing Carter Aviation's contracts would mean. When David arrived, the boardroom fell silent. The CEO of Delta Sky, Richard Holton, stood to greet him, his smile stiff. "Mr. Carter," he began, "thank you for taking the time." David shook his hand firmly. "Let's talk about your company's future," he said evenly. The conversation began with predictable lines, regret, miscommunication, promises of new initiatives. But David's tone never wavered. "This isn't about damage control," he said. "It's about values. You don't rebuild a brand by hiding mistakes. You rebuild by owning them." Holton nodded, clearly chastened. "We're implementing mandatory empathy and conduct training for all flight crews. And we'd like to propose a joint campaign, something positive to show change in motion." David considered that for a moment. "A joint campaign could work," he said finally, "if it's not just marketing. I want real investment, scholarships, recruitment outreach for underrepresented groups, partnerships with veterans and community projects at your airports. If you want respect back, start by earning it." Holton looked around the room, then back at him. "You'll have it," he said. "Every one of those initiatives." David nodded once. "Then you'll have your planes back. But I'll be watching." As he stood to leave, one of the younger executives, a woman in her 30s with a thoughtful expression, said softly, "Mr. Carter, I just wanted to say—" "I was on that flight." David paused. "Were you?" She nodded. "Row 7, I saw everything. I didn't know who you were at the time, but the way you handled it, it changed something in me. I realized how fast people jump to judgment. I've been rethinking a lot since then." David met her gaze and smiled gently. "That's how real change starts, one person at a time." When he stepped back into the sunlight outside, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt grounded, For the first time in days, he allowed himself to exhale. He walked along the riverfront for a while, watching boats drift lazily under the bridges. A few passers-by recognized him, whispering quietly, some offering small nods of respect. He returned each one with a polite smile, nothing more. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Ava, his COO. "Meeting went well?" "Better than expected," he replied. "Good. You've got calls waiting from 3 networks. They want you for interviews." "Decline them," he texted back. "Let the work speak." That evening he visited his mother's old neighborhood, a quiet stretch of red brick houses and overgrown lawns on the south side, where he'd grown up before he could afford to dream about airplanes. He parked across from the small community center that had once been his refuge as a kid. Inside, a youth robotics club was still meeting, kids laughing over circuits and motors. He walked in quietly, nodding to the volunteer at the front desk. "Mr. Carter," she said in surprise, "we didn't expect you." He smiled. "Didn't want a crowd. Just wanted to check on the next generation of engineers." The kids looked up, wide-eyed. One of them whispered, "That's the guy from the airplane video." David crouched beside their table. "That's me," he said lightly, "but that's not the part you should remember. Remember this. One day you'll be in a position to make things right for someone else. And when that happens, I hope you do it quietly." The boy nodded slowly. "Like you did?" David smiled. "Exactly." When he left, the sun had set, and the city lights shimmered off the river like scattered stars. As he drove home, he passed an electronic billboard that caught his attention. It showed a new airline advertisement, Delta Sky's new campaign, clearly inspired by their meeting. Across the image of a diverse group of employees and passengers were the words, "Respect is the real upgrade." For the first time all week, David laughed softly to himself. Maybe, he thought, that was the real victory. Not the apology, not the headlines, but the shift. The reminder that one moment of quiet dignity could echo far beyond the walls of a single airplane. When he got home, the city skyline glowing through his window, he finally allowed himself to relax. He opened his old notebook, the same one that had been stained with water that day, and wrote a single line on a blank page. "Leadership isn't about who bows to you when you're powerful. It's about who listens to you when you're calm." He closed the book, set it on the desk and looked out at the horizon. A horizon that, for the first time in a long while, looked bigger than the sky. The following month, the shockwaves from that flight had settled into something deeper, not scandal but transformation. Across the aviation industry, companies were rewriting their conduct manuals, rewriting how they trained flight crews, and rethinking what professionalism truly meant. For David Carter, life had returned to its familiar rhythm of meetings, travel, and quiet reflection. But the difference was visible everywhere he went. Airport staff greeted passengers with more care. Cabin crews carried themselves with renewed professionalism. And in conference halls, executives spoke less about quarterly profits and more about culture. He hadn't planned on being a symbol, but somehow his silence had spoken louder than any speech. One bright Thursday afternoon, David boarded a flight to Dallas for a business summit. The irony wasn't lost on him. The airline? Delta Sky, the same one that had once humiliated him, and now carried a new slogan printed in silver along the boarding tunnel. Every passenger, every time. Inside the plane, the atmosphere was noticeably different. The attendants greeted each passenger with genuine warmth. When David stepped on board, a young flight attendant with a bright smile said, "Welcome aboard, sir. May I take your jacket?" He smiled softly. "Thank you. You're very kind." As he settled into his seat, another attendant came by offering water bottles instead of plastic cups, something small but thoughtful. And above the galley door, a framed photo caught his eye. A simple image of an airplane wing at sunrise, with the words, "Respect is the real upgrade." He didn't need to ask who had approved it. The flight took off smoothly. Midway through, as the attendants moved quietly through the cabin, the chief attendant approached him. She was older than the rest, with lines at the corners of her eyes and the calm confidence of someone who'd seen everything the sky could throw at her. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "I just wanted to say thank you." He looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For not letting anger win," she said. "I was in training when the video went viral. It changed everything about how we were taught to handle conflict." The company made us talk about it for days, but it wasn't the slap we talked about. It was your reaction, your patience. You taught people what grace under pressure actually looks like. David's gaze softened. I didn't teach anything, he said quietly. I just chose peace when I could have chosen noise. She smiled. And that choice changed how we fly. When she walked away, he leaned back in his seat, looking out the window at the stretch of blue sky outside. The world below looked calm, endless and wide, like it always did when he flew, but somehow different now. By the time he landed in Dallas, the business summit was already in full swing. The ballroom of the hotel buzzed with industry leaders, CEOs and investors. When he entered, people turned, not in awe but in respect. The moderator introduced him to the crowd. Our next speaker needs no introduction, she said. He reminded all of us that leadership doesn't mean dominance. It means dignity. Please welcome Mr. David Carter. Applause rippled through the room as he stepped onto the stage. He adjusted the microphone, took a small breath and began, voice steady but gentle. When I started my career, he said, I believed success was about building things, engines, airplanes, networks. But over time I learned that the most important thing you can build isn't a product. So it's trust. The room fell still. Every decision we make, every person we hire, every way we treat someone, that's what defines the companies we build. One bad moment can destroy years of progress. One act of humility can restore it. He paused, letting the words breathe. People often ask me why I didn't lash out that day. The truth is I didn't need to. I already knew who I was. You don't need to shout when your integrity speaks for you. A quiet murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. I didn't fire back because I wasn't there to prove power, he said. I was there to prove principle. And principles don't bend for emotion. When he finished, the applause wasn't loud or frantic. It was the kind that carried weight, the kind that meant people understood. After the event, executives approached him one by one, some to thank him, some to ask for advice, and a few just to shake his hand. But it was one conversation near the end that stayed with him. A young woman in a Navy uniform stepped forward hesitantly. Mr. Carter. I'm Emily Turner. He looked at her, puzzled for a moment. Turner? She nodded. Sarah Turner's younger sister. The flight attendant from that day. David's expression softened immediately. Ah, I see. She's doing better, Emily said quietly. She took your words to heart. She's been volunteering with a veterans charity now. She says it's helping her see people differently, starting with herself. David smiled gently. I'm glad to hear that. Emily hesitated, then added, She told me to tell you something, that what you did gave her back her conscience. That she's sorry it took that much to find it. David nodded, his eyes thoughtful. Tell her I'm proud of her. We all fall short. Here's what we do next that defines us. Emily smiled gratefully before walking away. Later that evening, when the summit was over and the crowd had thinned, David stepped outside onto the hotel balcony. The city lights shimmered below, stretching out like a map of possibilities. He leaned against the railing, breathing in the cool air, feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks, peace, real and deep. He thought about all the people who had reached out, all the changes that had been set in motion, and how one act of calm had rippled through entire systems. Sometimes, the world didn't change through revolutions. Sometimes it changed through restraint. He pulled his phone from his pocket and sent one final message to Ava. Keep pushing the campaign forward, but make sure the message stays simple. Respect isn't policy. It's a habit. Then he put his phone away, watching the night sky stretch endlessly above. The hum of a departing jet rumbled faintly in the distance. The same sound that had once carried anger, now carrying quiet redemption. David smiled to himself and whispered, almost like a prayer, Grace always flies higher.